Hey everyone, it's really good to see you today. So, a lot of you have been asking what's going on with this whole $2,000 stimulus check idea and whether it's actually happening before Christmas. And honestly, I get why this is on everyone's mind. Money is tight. Prices feel like they're going up every week. And you hear the president talking about checks and tariffs and dividends and all that. And it's natural to wonder if something real is on the way, especially during the holidays. But here's something interesting that most people don't know. President Trump actually already addressed the timing of these checks himself, and what he said surprised a lot of people. And, there's also a pretty important detail about how much tariff money the country has actually collected so far and how that compares to how much these checks would cost, and that part is going to raise some eyebrows when we get to it. So let's talk about this $2,000 check. A lot of people have been calling it a tariff dividend because the whole idea is that the money for these checks would come from tariffs that President Trump wants to collect on imports. Not taxes on you, but taxes on foreign goods coming in. And he's talked about this for a while now, even during the campaign. So it's not some brand new thing he suddenly brought up. The basic idea is the government brings in money from tariffs, and instead of putting it all toward the debt or general spending, some of it would be turned into a cash payment for what he calls middle-income Americans. Now here's where things start getting confusing for people. Over the last couple weeks, there have been a ton of posts online, headlines, videos, all saying things like checks coming before Christmas or IRS preparing payments. And you see those and you think, okay, maybe something changed. But this is the important part. There is no bill, no legislation, no IRS program, nothing official that allows any $2,000 check to go out in 2025. The IRS even put out statements saying they aren't sending any new payments because there is no new law. And Trump himself said it pretty clearly just a few days ago. Someone asked him if the checks would come this year, and he said, no, not this year, next year sometime. And also when he said next year, he didn't even mean early next year. He suggested it would probably be closer to the middle of the year or even a little later. And then he hinted that the timing could line up before the midterms in 2026. And when a president ties a benefit to an election year, people notice. It doesn't automatically mean anything bad, but it does make folks wonder whether this is more of a long-range promise than an immediate plan. Speaking of which, it also reminds a lot of people of those pandemic stimulus checks where the idea sounded simple, but the process behind the scenes took a ton of debate, paperwork, rulemaking, and IRS logistics. Another thing to keep in mind is that tariffs do bring in money, but the numbers tell an interesting story. Tariff revenue so far for 2025 has been around $195 billion total. That sounds like a huge number at first, but let's compare it to what this check would cost. If you gave $2,000 to every adult earning under $100,000, that works out to about 150 million people. That means the price tag would be around $300 billion. And that's just adults. It could be more if kids were included. So when you do the math, the revenue collected so far does not fully cover the cost. And that leads to the question a lot of economists have been raising. Where would the rest of the money come from? Or would the checks be smaller than $2,000? Or would the government just borrow the remaining amount? So yeah, the math is something the administration would have to figure out before any checks could be issued. Now, something else people are curious about is who would qualify. Trump said middle-income and moderate-income Americans, but that's pretty broad. And as you know, the term middle income can mean very different things depending on where you live. Someone earning $100,000 in Mississippi lives a totally different life than someone earning $100,000 in California. Traditionally, the government uses thresholds like $75,000 for individuals and $150,000 for married couples, but nothing official has been written yet. So right now, any income cutoff you see floating around online is just speculation. And speaking of speculation, a lot of folks have been asking if a check like this would help or hurt the economy. That's a fair question. The people who support it say, look, families need help. Prices are still high. Wages haven't kept up, and a $2,000 boost could help people catch up on bills or just breathe a little easier. And honestly, I get that. Most of us have felt the impact of rising costs these last few years, and an extra $2,000 would make a difference. But then there are concerns. One thing people still remember is how the pandemic stimulus checks pushed a lot of money into the economy all at once. And that made inflation spike faster. Not the only cause, but definitely one of them. This new proposal could reignite inflation, which is something a lot of folks are worried about. And when inflation gets too high, seniors especially really feel that pain because their budgets are tighter and they can't just pick up extra work. Another point that keeps coming up is stagflation. That's when you have slow economic growth, higher unemployment, and rising prices all at the same time. Not a fun mix. Some economists worry that if a big one-time check goes out and boosts things temporarily, the economy could dip again after the money is spent, leaving behind just the inflationary pressure. And that's something nobody wants, especially heading into 2026. Another thing to consider is how long it takes for the government to set up something like this. Even if the administration wrote a full bill tomorrow, it would still have to go through Congress. And Congress is very divided right now. After that, the IRS would need months to build the system, set up eligibility rules, communicate with banks, and so on. It's not like flipping a light switch, which is why we know for sure nothing is happening before Christmas. The president himself said that part clearly. Also, when you look at comments about reducing the debt, that's another piece that complicates this idea because sending checks usually increases the deficit unless the money is already sitting somewhere ready to use. And since the tariff revenue so far doesn't cover the cost, that's why some analysts say the math doesn't line up yet. Speaking of math, let's talk about what this means for regular people. If a check like this did happen in 2026, it would obviously help millions of families. $2,000 might not fix everything, but it sure helps. And especially around the holidays, people always feel that extra financial pressure. You know, gifts, travel, food, just everyday life gets more expensive. So it makes sense that folks are hoping for something sooner. That's why there are so many rumors. People want it to be true. And honestly, one of the reasons updates like this matter is because of how confusing all this stuff can get. You see one headline saying checks are coming Friday, then another saying nothing is happening, then another claiming you need to sign up for something. And at the end of the day, all anyone really wants is straight answers. And I think that's fair. So here's the straight answer. There is no $2,000 stimulus check approved right now. There is no IRS schedule. There is no December payment. There is no pre-Christmas deposit. The earliest this could happen is sometime in 2026, and only if Congress passes a bill and the math is sorted out. But there's also something hopeful here, and I don't want to overlook that. The fact that the president keeps talking about sending money directly to Americans means it's still on the table as a possibility, and tariffs do create revenue. So even though nothing is set up yet, the idea isn't dead. It just isn't ready. What's more, the history behind these kinds of relief programs shows that once an idea has public support, it tends to stick around in Washington until someone eventually writes it into law. It might take time, but ideas like this rarely vanish completely. So even though nothing is happening before Christmas, that doesn't mean it won't ever happen. So, yeah, as we get closer to the holidays, I know a lot of people were hoping for better news. Even though the answer for this year is no, I still want you to stay encouraged. Relief can come in different forms, and we'll keep watching every official update together. Whenever something real happens, you'll know without any of the nonsense. Thanks for being here today.